Hi, and welcome back to another demo of the UK Electrical Simulator. In this video, we are going to build a simple radial socket circuit, test it using the test socket and RCD tester features, and then see what happens when we overload the RCBO and reset it. As always, we will start by adding a consumer unit, followed by a bus component, this time selecting C4, which is a 16 amp circuit. I'll move the consumer unit back into view during this demo. We will add 3 sockets from our component list on the left-hand side. We could add more, but 3 is sufficient for this demo. Once all are added, we can then start to wire them. We start by connecting L4 to the first line terminal, then continue from socket to socket, L to L. We do exactly the same for the neutral, connecting N4 to the first neutral terminal and then N to N. Finally, we connect the earth in the same way, from E4 to the first earth terminal, and then E to E across the rest of the sockets. We can add as many sockets as we like to this radial circuit. We could also add a fused spur and extend the example even further, but we will save that for another video. The socket component includes a few extra features compared with the devices we have used so far. The on-off switch works in a similar way, turning green when switched on, but we also have test socket and RCD buttons. These work in a similar way to plug-in test equipment. The test socket feature checks that the wiring is connected correctly, while the RCD button simulates an RCD test by tripping the RCBO on the board. You can also double-click the socket to change the name of the appliance plugged into it and set a different load value. By default, each socket is called load and set to 500 watts. There is also a T button, which enables test links. We will use those more in future videos. Before we energize the circuit, let's quickly look at the type of wiring being used. Press the W button on the bus component, then highlight the first brown wire. You can see that this wire is set to 10 meters, 2.5 mm squared, and colored brown. The neutral uses the same size and length, but in blue. The earth conductor, however, is set to 1.5 mm squared. So in effect, we have wired these sockets using 2.5 mm squared twin and earth cable, or more accurately, 2-core and CPC cable, which is the standard type of cable commonly used for socket circuits. Now it is time to energize the circuit by pressing the C4 button on the bus. Switch on the first socket and you will see a small sine wave animation appear. On the circuit meter, you can also see the load being drawn, which in this case is 2.17 amps and 500 watts. Let's also activate the current flow animation by pressing the A button on the bus. Now switch on all 3 sockets and watch the current rise on the circuit meter, while the animation extends across the rest of the circuit. As I have mentioned before, this is not literally how current flows in a real AC circuit. The animation is simply there as a visual training aid to help you see which parts of the circuit are energized and carrying load. We can now test the circuit wiring by pressing the Test Socket button. If everything is wired correctly, an OK label will appear. This will show for a few seconds and will disappear. Then press the RCD button to trip the RCBO. The breaker will trip, glow red, and a pass label will appear briefly on screen. Now let's introduce a simple fault. Power C4 off. Click the T button on the middle socket to enable the test links, then remove the links from the earth terminals. If we now press the test socket button on the N socket, it will now show an Open E error. Once the message has disappeared, press the RCD button. This time it will show a fail result, again indicating Open E. Press the T button on the middle socket. This will remove the test links. Before we finish this demo, let's now overload the C4 RCBO and see how the simulator responds. First, switch off all the sockets and turn off C4. For this example, we will increase the loads on the 3 sockets. Set the first socket to 1.5 kilowatts, the second socket to 2 kilowatts, and the third socket to 0.5 kilowatts. Now re-energize C4 and switch on the first socket. You will see the circuit meter showing 6.52 amps and 1.5 kilowatts. Next, switch on the second socket, and the readings will jump to 15.22 amps and 3.5 kilowatts. At this point, we are getting very close to the 16 amp limit of the circuit. Once we switch on the final socket, the RCBO will trip. To reset it, switch off the sockets, then click the C4 button on the bus, or the RCBO itself on the consumer unit. This will reset the breaker and restore the circuit. I hope you enjoyed this demo. Please like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. I'd really love to hear your thoughts, especially if you think this kind of tool would help support your training journey towards becoming a UK electrician.